speelbakt.
Yeah. Good. So, I guess.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed with the third and final session of today, Regional Investment Map, New Opportunities for the U.S. and Azerbaijan Investment and Trade Partnership. The moderator for this session will be Daniel Basis, Senior Correspondent, Reuters. Daniel Basis is a veteran print and broadcast correspondent who has covered financial, foreign policy, and general news for the last 20 years.
Thank you very much. If we can invite everybody in to come forward. It's an intimate end of the day. Have your coffee. Let's get down to a good conversation. I am Daniel Basis with Reuters News. I thank you to the organizers and the panelists for making time today to look at new opportunities for investment between the U.S. and Azerbaijan and just investment in general. And no doubt by now everyone has a good idea of Azerbaijan's economic structure and performance. What we hope to achieve with our discussion this afternoon is to identify some of the success stories in expanding that economic structure beyond the energy sector, what pitfalls there have or are that people have experienced, what investors can expect when trying to do business in Azerbaijan. So I'll leave the details of everyone's bio to the literature on hand and on the website. Suffice to say, we have a very experienced group of individuals here who've watched and participated in Azerbaijan's development from a former Soviet state to a fast-growing economy. So joining us are, just to my left, Jim Hogan, managing partner of Dentons, based in Paris and Baku. We have Michael Lally, Executive Deputy Assistant Secretary, U.S. Commerce Department, based in D.C. We have Greg Saunders, Director International Affairs of BP, also in D.C., and Ralph Mamadov, Director of SOCAR in the United States, also based in D.C. So Azerbaijan, just under 10 million people, saw GDP growth of 2.8% in 2014, and it's forecast to see that growth skid to 0.6% this year before recovering to 3.3% in 2020, and that's according to the latest IMF data. It's a far cry from the 25% growth rate in 2007, but not surprising given the collapse in oil prices. For contrast, the world's advanced economies grew 3.4% last year, and forecasts are that the IMF's anyway is to reach 4% by 2020. However, inflation is rising or expected to rise in Azerbaijan. So diversifying the economy away from hydrocarbons is therefore a critical component of underpinning a vibrant economy and smooth out growth going forward. It enjoys a strong external financing position and an enviably low debt-to-GDP ratio and investment-grade credit ratings. So I'd like to start today by asking each of our panelists to briefly answer the following question, then we'll go from there. So as you look at development of business relationships between the U.S. and Azerbaijan, what industries do you see the most potential for cross-border investment? And if it's in the energy sector, perhaps drill down to what portion of that sector and why. So why don't we start on the far end here with Ralph, please.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for inviting us here. And I know it's been a long weekend after Memorial Weekend, and glad that you guys are here. And I think these kind of events are very important for Azerbaijan, and being a representative of a state-owned company of Azerbaijan, which is the biggest company in the country and probably in the region, I'm proud to represent my company here. I think as an oil and gas company representative, I would more dwell on the energy aspects of the issue, how American companies can be present in Azerbaijan or in the companies, in the projects that has been launched from Azerbaijan. As you know, SOCAR is one of those national oil companies of former Soviet world which transformed from a link in a great grand value chain of Soviet economy into independent oil company, and we've started first doing projects domestically, and then starting investing regionally, and then in Europe. So of course, the transnational pipeline projects are very important for us. And, successful stories have been done. First of all, BTC, South Caucasus Pipeline Project. And now we are in the implementation of the Southern Gas Corridor, which is a $45 billion project. And I think these kind of investment opportunities are very formidable opportunities for American companies that they can invest into. Southern Gas Corridor is a grand project. It consists of the upstream, the exploration, production, and then the infrastructure. And I think American companies can be very successful in different sections of this implementation of this project.
In terms of the project themselves, the Southern Gas Corridor, where is the need to have outside investment come in terms of what aspect? Is it the steel pipes? Is it the pressure valves? What kind of businesses do you think are really going to find a fruitful place in this project, perhaps?
First of all, construction process is already underway.
Right.
And I will leave Greg to elaborate more on the progress of the project. And in fact, several bidding processes have already been completed, and my assumption is that American companies have been granted with the participation in the project. So there's as you mentioned, the construction of the pipeline, the tubes, and many other aspects have been already covered. And but I think there's a huge need for American companies and for any other companies who are well experienced in the implementation of the project. SOCAR is very proud that it's managing the Turkey stretch of the pipeline, and so it's our first independent management of the construction, and we are willing to see many companies from Europe and United States to be active in that. Mm-hmm. And Greg can talk more about the overall process and the progress of the project.
Well, let's go there, Greg. From your perspective, the question, and then perhaps how Ralph led to you with that perspective on the southern gas pipeline.
So thanks, Dan, and thanks to the U.S. Azeri Chamber of Commerce for hosting this event today. I echo Ralph's comments. Events like these in cities like New York can help deliver important messages to important constituencies that Azerbaijan is not only open for business, but as you pointed out earlier, open for the right kind of business, for the right kind of companies, particularly in the U.S. BP looked at this region a little over 20 years ago, looking for investment opportunities after the collapse of the Soviet Union. In particular, looked to Kazakhstan initially, and then secondarily Azerbaijan. And then in the early 1990s made big bets, big multi-billion-dollar bets on Azerbaijan, initially on oil and now on gas. And if you were to see a pipeline offshore infrastructure map, you would see that there's no other company or no other country in the region that has seen such extraordinary investment and development around infrastructure, including roads and telephone and other sorts of networks, IT networks, that really reflect the robust investment climate in the region. Your specific question is around the Southern Gas Corridor. To put this in perspective, in early 2007, BP and SOCAR initiated phase 1 of the Shah Deniz gas project. Shah Deniz in Azeri means king of the sea. It's one of the largest gas fields in the world, producing at the time a little over 9 billion cubic meters of gas per year to regional markets, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and 80% of that supply into Turkey. Phase 2 of this project, which Ralph referred, will produce an additional 16 billion cubic meters of gas and for the very first time, make 10 of that supply available to Europe through the construction of the Southern Gas Corridor, which connects the Southern Caspian region offshore Azerbaijan into Southern Europe through a brand new dedicated pipeline network through Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey, and Greece, Albania, and Italy, connecting the gas into Italy's gas grid. It's a $45 billion project. Final investment decision was taken in December of 2013. To put it in context, I'll get to your question in a moment, Dan, I think to put this in context, this is a project, one of the largest, most complex energy projects in the world that extends across 7 countries with 11 different companies invested in the project and 9 different buyers of the gas. Keeping all of those countries, companies, and buyers aligned during the construction project is a mammoth undertaking for which we have lots of assistance, not only partners with SOCAR, but governments along the way as well as the American government and the EU. The first part of this project is the upstream, the development of the gas, 16 additional BCMA, and expansion of the existing pipeline through Azerbaijan and Georgia. By the end of this year, that project will be about 50% complete. There's already been over $10 billion in construction contracts let, from supply to service companies to pipe to valves. There are about 6-7 major US companies who are major contractors to that part of the project. Financing is all balance sheet and equity financing. Of the 7 companies that are involved in the upstream, 2 are financing off their balance sheet and 3 are taking out loans primarily, the rest taking out loans primarily through the EBRD. Where you see the next wave of bidding contracts, Dan, this is your question, is primarily, as Ruff said, is the pipeline, the dedicated pipeline through Turkey, called TANAP, the Trans-Anatolian Pipeline, and the pipeline through Southern Europe called TAP, or the Trans-Adriatic Pipeline. So the TANAP project, which is led by SOCAR, with help from the Turkish pipeline company called BOTAŞ and BP, just begun major pipeline and infrastructure contracts, building camps, building facilities along the right-of-way. You will see over the course of the next year major multi-billion-dollar contracts to support what in essence will be probably a $10 to $11 billion pipeline project. Then the last piece of this is in Southern Europe. The TAP pipeline is just getting started with respect to major contracts. It's now, I think in the next couple of weeks, we'll let the major pipeline projects. We're also building construction camps, looking specifically at companies in Greece, in Albania, and Italy, as well as European and American companies to come in and provide service company and service equipment support. So those will be the major pieces that are coming literally as we sit here in beautiful New York City. Lots of multi-billion-dollar contracts coming and coming soon. Mm-hmm. Sorry for that long answer, but it's a...
Not at all. Not at all. So, Michael.
Daniel, thanks very much. It's a tough act to follow after BP, but I also want to thank U.S. Azerbaijan Chamber of Commerce as well and the sponsors for the opportunity to speak today. And it's great to kind of have a sense of a homecoming, Daniel, with regard to Baku, where I had a chance to work in our American Embassy's commercial service back in the early 2000s. And what we were doing at the time was very specific to your question, which was regard to major project development on behalf of American firms looking for opportunities in Azerbaijan, understanding the climate, doing the due diligence, looking for the trade and project finance, the whole element of any kind of project cycle. And so as I was preparing for today and thinking ahead to kind of, what you're going to say, I had to go back and update some of my numbers to see where I was, because I was probably a few years out of date. And a couple of things really struck me as I think about it, and it will come to your question with regard to specific areas of industries and cross-border transaction. But the first thing that struck me was last year we had a record amount of trade between the United States and Azerbaijan, about $2 billion. I think within that, when you peel that number apart, you see the challenge, because a lot of that obviously is tied up in large capital equipment orders and petroleum products. So the effort there, as we've heard of the theme today from a number of the bankers in the room, is how to diversify, how to create that competitive opportunity. But then looking at another number, you see about 150 American firms have operations now in Azerbaijan, ranging from small consulting firms to other professional service firms and some of the larger, obviously, operators and multinationals. So that kind of gives us a sense. And I mean, and then you kind of pick out little things that you see developing. You know, I think one of the things that struck me as I look ahead and think about some of the sectors is, as you see, as has been already talked about, the direct connections now between Baku and New York on Azal. That was a project actually that we worked with our U.S. Trade Development Agency that had provided feasibility study funding for Azal and the airport to develop Category 1 of FAA security approval. As you can imagine, that's not an easy thing to do. Azerbaijan stepped up to it and did it. And you say, well, that's great that there's going to be more flights, but that also creates really interesting kind of packs and transit cargo opportunity as well from the CIS in the Middle East. So you see already that kind of cross-border element happening. So let me mention a couple of other things before turning back to Daniel is, you know, every year at our American embassies abroad, not only in Baku, but, you know, around the world, we take a look at the market. We talk to businesses, we talk to bankers, we talk to lawyers, we talk to anybody involved in the transaction cycle and say, well, where do we see the opportunity? And I don't think there's any huge surprises here. Obviously energy, all sorts of elements of transportation infrastructure, air, sea, and rail. We see it obviously in agribusiness and information and communications technologies. So let me pull two very quick examples, Daniel, to your point with regard to that and how we've tried to bring in the trade and project finance element into it. First in ITC, and for information and communications technologies. Some of you are aware of the launch of Azerspace 1. I think one of our speakers spoke to it just a few hours ago, which was the first satellite launch in the Caucasus. And that is now providing Azerspace 1, developed by Orbital from Virginia, is now providing, I think it has at least a dozen radio stations and over 100 channels all throughout the Middle East and Levant coverage range that it has there. That was financed through a loan guarantee by our U.S. Export-Import Bank, about $117 million. And you could argue that, you know, kind of interesting that the Americans built a satellite that the Azeris have launched that's now providing Levant coverage, you know, throughout the Middle East is kind of an interesting cross-border transaction, I would say, and it's generating revenue, obviously, for Azercosmos. And we know we're looking forward to the next decision on that for Azerspace 2. We're very confident that Azercosmos, again, will continue with the good, strong cooperation that they've had, certainly with the United States. In fact, we're putting money and skin in the game through our feasibility study funding for Azerspace 2 satellite, looking at markets for this satellite where airtime could be sold on the satellite and the like. And that's kind of an element of real down-to-earth, you know, sort of, you know, roll-up-your-sleeves partnership. So, you know, that's one element. And the other element I would bring out is where we see opportunities in terms of the larger cross-border. Later this year, Baku-Tbilisi cars rail transit will begin. I think that's going to be important for a lot of reasons. It's not only important for connecting Caucasus to Europe, but it's also going to be that bridge has been talked about very eloquently before with regard to Asia development. And while that Baku-Tbilisi cars will grow and become even more vibrant, I think the key thing is that you have competitive rates on these lines and competitive transportation companies and logistics that can sell frequency into that route. So there's a couple of things there that maybe we can talk a bit more about.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd also like to thank organizers, US ACC, for giving me the opportunity to speak this afternoon. I also want to clear the air a little bit. I was introduced as the managing partner of Denton's. Actually, I'm the managing partner of the Baku office of Denton's. My law firm, having just broached the threshold of 6,000 lawyers globally in 100 offices, 100 plus offices in 60 plus countries, I really think that Baku presents significant and sufficient challenges for me, and in the modest Baku office that I manage. It's hard to follow the three previous speakers who've gone over the whole horizon of areas where American companies might see opportunities in Azerbaijan. Obviously, the oil sector, read broadly, presents the most opportunity and would be the most lucrative sector for American companies. And American companies, particularly in the oil services area, have very, very specific expertise that's much in demand in Azerbaijan. I also have to say that the first two world-class fields that were discovered in offshore Caspian, the Azeri-Chirag-Ganeshli field, which was an oil project, and the Shah Deniz field, which was evoked a few minutes ago, are not the end of the story. There are perhaps 5 or 6 other major gas fields under development in the Caspian, one of which had a commercial discovery a few years ago, the Absheron deposit. And that field plus the others will give plenty of opportunities for oil field services companies. Also, the ICT sector was mentioned. For a very long time, the government of Azerbaijan has stressed the importance of diversifying the economy in the non-oil sector. And ICT was identified as one of those ways where Azerbaijan could really create a leap across various technologies and developed something that's very important and very much outside of the traditional industries that were found in Azerbaijan. Finally, agribusiness was mentioned, and this is the year that was declared by the government as the year of agriculture in Azerbaijan. Probably, given that the agriculture sector has, I wouldn't say has been neglected, but certainly hasn't received the same amount of attention that the oil sector and other industries have received. The agriculture sector not only presents opportunities, but it's probably the area of greatest need for the expertise of major American agribusiness companies. So that's something where American companies could definitely contribute and add to the development and prosperity of Azerbaijan.
Terrific. So a big range of viewpoints and areas to cover. And I'm going to pick up on what you just talked about, oil services area, but I'm going to actually ask Ralph about that. As the representatives for SOCAR here, how easy or difficult has it been, and I think I may already know the answer, but I'll ask the question anyway, to attract the oil services industry to Azerbaijan, given the 2 big fields that were created? We've got the 2 pipelines now, and as Jim mentioned, 5 or 6 more areas that are ripe for development. But I wanted to ask it in the sense of, here in the United States, we've had the fracking revolution. You know, it's created a tremendous surplus of oil and gas. And have you been able to look at that development here and say, okay, how can we bring whatever they're learning here and new developments, how is that translated, if at all, as you're looking at it? Maybe nothing definitive, but perhaps give us a little insight into how you're using or seeing what's going on in the U.S. industry, and what may be transferable to Azerbaijan at this point.
Well, from conventional standpoint, from conventional technologies, I think the companies have always been present in Azerbaijan since the contract of the century was signed in 1994. Back then, Amoco was one of the co-signers of the project, and many other contractors and subcontractors who mainly were implementing conventional technologies to develop the fields were present there. The fracking, the non-conventional, how the oil and gas sector calls it now, is of course something new, but when you look at the technology, horizontal drilling, which is the major component of the fracking, have been deployed by the industry for more than 5 decades already. It's the combination of the fracking and horizontal drilling that made the shale revolution possible. Hasn't been utilized in Azerbaijan, or probably it will be fair to say mainly in other parts of the world besides the United States. Of course, that dragged our attention as a company. as you know, Azerbaijan was one of the first, we claim the first oil producer in the world, and we had onshore fields mainly producing during the first oil boom. So our geologists have made calculations, and they came to conclusion that Azerbaijan does have shale reserves. And so based on the instruction, we studied the market, and we looked at some Marcellus shale opportunities in Pennsylvania, as well as some oil fields in Eagle Ford. Unfortunately, the rapid decline of oil prices has made it's a overall belt tightening process going on throughout the industry right now, as you can see from all those cost cuts from the major companies, and SOCAR is not an exception in this regard. But the interest is there. We have looked at several opportunities. I think not only European companies or other companies from other parts of the world should come and invest in and learn the technologies here, but also must create interest for shale companies here to go and invest abroad, because of course there are some challenges, and I think those challenges are obvious. What Poland has gone through with the shale, and many other countries are a clear example of it. But overall, I think shale technologies are being constantly improved, and I think there is a huge potential for it. And I think maybe in the near future, hopefully when the oil prices go back, more and more companies will be interested to go and invest in Azerbaijan, in the shale industry of Azerbaijan.
Mm-hmm. Please.
I can follow on with that. While the issue of fracking is an interesting topic in the U.S., I think it's useful to point out there is perhaps a more interesting and more exciting technological research and technological evolution currently underway in Azerbaijan. Not well known. We cited earlier some of the next round of gas fields for development. Some of those fields, if not most of them, are at exceptionally deep levels, high pressure, and if you had a geologist in the room, they would tell you it's a reservoir, it's rock that moves. It's extraordinarily difficult to access and extraordinarily difficult to drill. And for the most part, the technology today to access that gas does not exist. The industry in general, and BP in particular, has engaged quite aggressively in developing the technology and the ability to access that gas at 20,000 feet under enormously high pressure. In fact, we've built a huge new R&D facility in Houston, arguably one of the most sophisticated, complex R&D facilities in the world, looking at 4D to not only analyze these fields offshore Azerbaijan, but to develop the technology, the machinery, the equipment necessary, able to drill down to 20,000 feet, high pressure, extraordinarily complex, and bring that gas to the surface in a safe, economical way. So while fracking is an interesting topic in the US for the moment, there are other major technological revolutions underway throughout the industry, and one of them is focused specifically on, Azerbaijan.
Interesting, very interesting. Michael, how would you describe the response U.S. businesses have had toward Azerbaijan? So I'll characterize it as, are they beating down the doors? Is it a cautious approach? What kind of companies are approaching now versus, say, 10 or 20 years ago as the region opened up after the fall of the Iron Curtain?
Terrific. Thanks, Daniel. Great question. It's evolved certainly over time. I think you kind of had a kind of a gold rush mentality in the 90s probably, where you had companies coming in, looking at the market with a lot of opportunity both inside the PSA, maybe lesser so outside the PSA, and then that matured in the aughts and into the teens. And what we try to do in terms of how to get American companies to look at the market is in a couple of different ways. One, we try to approach companies who have had a lot of experience in emerging markets. So whether they might be in Turkey, they might be in different parts of the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, others that have done work in emerging energy markets, where finding local partners is very important, and to be able to anchor their business. So that's something I think we've seen change a bit over time. Part of what we're trying to do, Daniel, as well with regard to our approach as the United States government in bringing American companies into the market, into Azerbaijan, and for that matter into the Caucasus and Central Asia, is a regional strategy. We try to look at large concentrations of American companies in Turkey, in Europe, in Russia, in other areas as well, that might have interest either in specific opportunities, particularly non-oil and gas, in Azerbaijan. So you take, for example, in Turkey, where I had the chance to spend the last 4 years doing business development. There's about 1,300 American companies based in Turkey. So what we did was we went out and working with our American chambers of commerce, both in Baku and in Ankara and in Istanbul, we said, well, let's take a look at Azerbaijan and say, let's find where do we want these American companies to be looking at. So we had aerospace and defense, we had major industrials, we had Dow, Raytheon, another medium-sized company called HMT, who came out to Baku back in just about a year and a half ago.
So arguably much different than it was in 1994.
Right. I think that was before 1994, it was a bit more of, and again, we're going back 20 years now, it was basically people flying in on planes and looking for opportunity, and you had a lot of entrepreneurial spirit there, people looking to try to find a number of needles in the haystack. Here, I think, as the market has matured, as American companies have matured with it, that's how we've looked at it. So in this case, when we came out about a year and a half ago, we worked very closely with Azpromo. We had about 60 one-on-one meetings in Baku where we brought companies face-to-face with their business partners, whether it's in the government, selling on a government procurement, or looking to find reps and agents. And we, as we do every 60 or 90, 120 days, we go back and look at the results. And in one case, this American firm based in Turkey, an industrial, did find about $7 million of business came out of that day in Baku. They've added more business to their rep there. Another company is identifying business with BP, adding another rep as well. Another company is partnering with a Turkish firm to do some more IT development, actually, in software in Baku. So I would say that's kind of the way we look at it, is how do we bring in American companies regionally into these very discrete opportunities in Azerbaijan. It's not a secret, I think, for anybody that the book of American companies in this part of the world, including in Russia and Ukraine, is a bit lighter than it was maybe 12, 18 months ago. So we say, well, how do you reorient your book to look at opportunities throughout the Caucasus and Central Asia? And obviously, because of Azerbaijan's deeper market, I think that this is an opportunity for American firms, and that's how we look at it.
Mm-hmm. So do you find that there are, I think you mentioned, or one of the panels mentioned already, agribusiness, the year of agriculture. Do you find that, is it European food companies that are pushing out potential U.S. food companies from getting into Azerbaijan? How much of a fight is there between, say, geographically they're closer, maybe they have a closer ties historically, perhaps. How is it that U.S. companies are able to insert themselves into this situation, given the fact that, yes, Azerbaijan has good relations with the United States, it seems, at this point in time? So maybe the dynamic of how not just the U.S., but the U.S. competing with Europeans or Asians in Azerbaijan. Any perspective? Well,
sure. I mean, it's a dynamic market. I mean, it's not just, I would say, European or American competition. You also have competition from former Soviet linkages that are there through Russia as well. Yeah. You have export markets that work in that connection. You also have equipment and other legacy items that go on. I think that there's a few elements I think that's important to take into account, and none of these are terribly new. But I think when companies come in, obviously the first thing we talk about is the importance of identifying that local partner. And that might sound easy and pretty straight textbook, but I think has also been talked about by some of the bankers here as well. The opportunity in getting that kind of clean and clear data about what a company has done over time, what's been their lending record, what's been their borrowing record, how have they worked that. that's something that I think is still in the development process, so companies can do their due diligence on that. I think the trade and project finance element is very important here. That's why we're all here, where we look and we try to bring in feasibility study money into it, or trade finance money into it, or for that matter, project finance. And you had gone back and you had talked as well about what are some of the larger cross-border things that have been done. I think one of the interesting things that's been done, obviously, with SOCAR is the Star Refinery in Izmir, which is a large project where US Exim had approved a $641 million direct loan into the project to support US goods and services equipment into this new large refinery that's actually in Turkey, but taking feedstock and SOCAR for looking at petrochemical sales into the larger market. So with regard to American companies, I think they see the opportunity. They see the challenges that are there as well with regard to making sure that their customs and tax administration is lined up right, making sure that they have good legal counsel so that they can understand how their contracts are structured, what recourse that they have is necessary in the event of any situations with regard to arbitration. But those are the sorts of things that are proper due diligence that you would do in really any new emerging market.
Jim, from a legal perspective, how would you describe the landscape legislatively, commercially, and perhaps what gives your clients operating in Azerbaijan confidence and perhaps what are their main concerns in operating there? I mean, what keeps them up at night, I suppose?
Well, the same things that keep us up at night, I suppose. I have to say that Azerbaijan is a land of many opportunities, but it's also a land of not inconsiderable risks. And among those risks are legal risks. Azerbaijan is a civil law country. The legal framework is comprised of roughly 12 codes, of which the civil code, which is a modern civil code, is the paramount basis for any kind of transaction in the country. The civil code is supplemented by basic legislation in a number of areas. Something that's a little different about Azerbaijan is that whereas in the Russian Federation and Ukraine and Kazakhstan, there was an initial wave of basic framework legislation that was enacted in the early 1990s. And then that developed into quite elaborately detailed legislation and laws and regulations in virtually every area. In Azerbaijan, the legislative character remained at pretty much the framework level. So the laws tend not to be terribly detailed. And that is something that has both advantages and disadvantages. It's advantageous in that this frees the parties to a contract to define the relationship within the contract without many worries about whether there's some impediment to what they're trying to do found in a basic law. And I should also emphasize that freedom of contract is a paramount principle under the Civil Code in Azerbaijan, and also the rule that whatever is not prohibited is permitted plays a very important role in how things are done. So the advantages are there's a greater flexibility of contracting parties to define their relationship. On the other hand, there's a certain lack of comfort where certain areas, especially in the banking and finance field, are simply not only not regulated but not even mentioned. So one can fill certain gaps by elaborating terms of a contract, but the fact that there are gaps and the fact that there are some ambiguities and in some case contradictions within the laws also opens up a risk of arbitrary or conflicting interpretation of the law by public officials, something that's very difficult to counter when you don't have much of a legislative basis on which to rely. Fortunately, Azerbaijan is also very, very liberal in terms of choice of law. As long as there exists a so-called foreign element in a legal relationship, it's possible to conclude your contract under foreign law, under English law, which is, I would say, the norm in case of banking and finance documentation and certainly in mergers and acquisitions, especially in the oil and gas sector. At the same time, Azerbaijan is also very open in allowing international arbitration to regulate and decide disputes. That's tremendously important given that the judicial system in Azerbaijan, well, it's much improved from the way it was 10, 15 years ago, even 5 years ago, with better trained judges, more experienced judges, truly professional judges that frankly have less and less patience for arguments based on, for example, the early cases where you have a big foreign company and an Azerbaijani company. There was a certain bias in favor of the local party. That's no longer the case. But one can't say that the judicial system is yet at a state where it inspires the confidence of foreign investors, especially where there are sophisticated transactions involved. So parties can contract under foreign law. They can provide for international arbitration to resolve their disputes. And because Azerbaijan is a party to the New York Convention, the Azerbaijani court system is obliged to enforce any decision that an international arbitral tribunal could make. So that's one of the ways to navigate around some of the uncertainties and difficulties in Azerbaijan and in the legal system of Azerbaijan. But one would hope that over time, perhaps a greater effort would be given to drafting elaborate legislation in the right way, nothing done hastily or in a half-baked manner, but something that would give better comfort to foreign investors and contracting parties in the country.
Mm-hmm. Now, politically, the government has cracked down on dissent, and it's seen as muzzling journalists and bloggers. I think that it's fair to say that that's the view taken from the outside, perhaps not the inside, but certainly on the view on the outside. Is that a concern amongst business executives of this kind of environment at all, as you've seen, or if any of the other panelists would like to jump in?
It's directed to me?
First, yes, initially, from a legal perspective.
Well, it's absolutely the case that Azerbaijan has a ways to go in terms of basic civil liberties. Freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of the press. These are all areas that I think any developing civilized country will strive to put in place. Now, the speed with which Azerbaijan has made progress in this area, I think, has to be looked at in the context of Azerbaijan's history. At the time of the breakup of the Soviet Union, each of the newly independent states faced horrific dislocations economically, with contracting economies, hyperinflation, loss of life savings among much of the public, and the necessity to quickly adapt to a new economic system without really the tools with which to adapt quickly. In Azerbaijan's case, on top of this economic dislocation, you had a situation where there was an actual serious shooting war at the time of independence, and a refugee problem. There were 1 million refugees from the war with Armenia. So with all of these problems, and also a succession of unstable governments, perhaps it's not surprising that the state concentrated on stability and using the oil revenues to create some form of prosperity, gradual prosperity to the Azerbaijani public. And I'd have to say that while, like probably almost everyone in this room, I would, of course, like to see Azerbaijan adopt the types of civil liberties more in tune with what Americans would like to see. The fact is the government has delivered, not in a perfect manner, but it definitely has delivered in terms of creating a basic prosperity for the Azerbaijani people. Just 15 years ago, the poverty rate in Azerbaijan was over 60%. And as of last year, it had been brought down below 5%.
That's tremendous, tremendous progress.
Tremendous progress. And there's been a development of a middle class and also a development of a professional class. We have a whole generation since Azerbaijani independence. And from day one following independence, there's been tremendous attention paid to educating young people. Azerbaijani students are found throughout the world, but particularly in American universities in England, in Europe. And these people learn new skills. They see other parts of the world, how things are done, where there are tremendous successes, where there may be mistakes, and they bring these ideas back to Azerbaijan. I have tremendous faith in the Azerbaijani people, and particularly among the younger generation. And I think Azerbaijan will get where we want it to be, where most people will want it to be over time. But it's a young country, just 23 years old, and these things do take time, and a certain amount of stability is necessary to be constructed in the first instance.
Sure.
And from to
Please.
add up on the business environment, on the legal aspects of the issue, I just want to make a note that 18 production sharing agreements have been signed since the first one, since 1994, and all have been ratified by Parliament of Azerbaijan. And not a single change has been made to any of them past 21 years, and which is a very good track record if you look at the region.
Enviable.
The obvious things that are happening in the region. I think that's something that should be highly evaluated.
Absolutely. An enviable record. Yes,
And
please.
if I may, I mean, just to address your question, and I think, Jim made some very eloquent points that I think are tied into all of a historical context. Obviously, I think, as you know, obviously, between the United States and Azerbaijan, we've had 2 decades of discussions across the range of our political, economic, cultural, other engagements as well, including all the elements that you've talked about in freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and the like. And that's what we continue to do through our embassies in Baku and our embassies in Washington of how we reach out. And that's something that continues, along the whole time medium. Our Assistant Secretary of State, Victoria Nuland, was in Baku, I think in just February, had excellent meetings talking about the broader picture of how we want a very close and vibrant U.S.-Azeri relationship, which I think is especially important given the events in the region in the last 14 or 15 months. And we heard that back as well, played back to us. I think when you take a look at it from American companies' perspective, American companies, as Jim has pointed out, look at the overall economic development of the country. And if you were to compare where it stood economically, 10, 15, 20 years ago and where it is now, we're kind of at that inflection point of opportunity, where we're coming out of a situation where, as Jim really kind of laid it all out, where the country was moving from a developing and now into an even higher level developing and developed economy, which obviously, like others, will have areas where there's great opportunity and great challenge. But I think when American companies look at the economic development, that's something that they're very much focused on and see the opportunities in Azerbaijan.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'd like to make sure that we have time for questions from the audience. So it's a little bit hard to see with the lights, but if there are any questions anybody has for our panelists, I don't know if there's a microphone going around. Forgive me. Yes, sir. In the front row, please. I don't. There's a microphone just coming right now. Hold on.
Got a question.
Mm-hmm. Please identify yourself.
Yeah, I'm Bill Delahunt, and I'm going to be giving the closing remarks rather than Greg Meeks, who was called to lead a CODEL in Latin America and regrets the fact that he's not here present. I know he would benefit from it. But I'm going to address this to Secretary Lally. What American institutions, I'm talking about the Import-Export Bank, TDA, OPEC, are currently playing a role in the relationship between the United States, and what more could they do?
Thanks.
Excellent.
Congressman, thank you very much for that. Let me kind of give a number of examples that have kind of came out over the years with regard to how our trade and project finances approach the market, and I'll give the update. As time has passed, when during the kind of real excitement in the region in Central Asia, Caucasus, with regard to pipelines and East-West Energy Corridor and others, we did have a Caspian Finance Center which tried to bring the whole full cycle range of feasibility project development into trade and project finance, limited recourse project financing and the like. And so through that Caspian Finance Center, which did include Trade and Development Agency, which is feasibility study funding, Exim Bank, which I think many of you know, and our Overseas Private Investment Corporation, Literally, hundreds of billions of dollars of deals were struck both in and outside the oil and gas sector. I remember specifically working on a deal with OPEC a number of years ago with a small oil tools firm that had to do explosives for the casing within the formation and within the drill pipe and the drill string. And that was also backed by OPEC, which had to basically fund a lot of the explosives coming into Baku to do that. So there's been really, I think, some very good work. Some of the things I mentioned earlier are kind of the current projects that we have. First of all, EXIM is open on public and private sector finance up to 7 years. 7 years and more. So for short, medium, and long-term lending, both public and private EXIM is open. OPIC is continuing to take projects. It's done a number of bits of work in SME and micro lending as well, specifically focused on women-owned businesses. And TDA, I mean, what better example for those of you who will fly back or flew here on Azal, as I mentioned earlier, TDA provided the funding through a company called the Wix Group, which provided the FAA Category 1 certification for Baku International Airport. That is opening up not only those direct flights, but the PAX and cargo transit revenue that's going to come out of that, which will build upon top of the cold storage that Hyder Aliyev Airport is also built in as well. So you get the whole project cycle as well. We continue to look at future projects. Again, I apologize for repeating myself, but as Azerspace 2, TDA provided feasibility study funding to help Azercosmos look at the market for an Azerspace 2 satellite and what kind of space could be sold on the satellite with regard to programming all throughout the Africa continent, so that when the satellite is purchased, we can see the content that would be loaded onto it, providing revenue for Azercosmos, and certainly our hope that Azercosmos will make a favorable decision in favor of American companies. So I think that that's the active portfolio. I think the challenge is, Bill, that we need to get our trade and project finances agencies out there even more often, because as anybody knows here, we have boutique financial firms here as well. If you don't go out and sniff out the project, it isn't going to come looking for you. You got to get out and do that. And that's something that we're doing through our regional strategic program, as I mentioned before, where we have using our embassy in Baku and our office based in Ankara, the U.S. Embassy's commercial service, where we have an associate relationship where we're sending American firms that are already doing business in Turkey and saying, have you looked at Azerbaijan lately? You haven't? Well, let's set up some programming and some meetings for you. Or bringing Azeri firms into some of our regional programming, which we did last year when we had about 18 American healthcare and health tech firms come to Istanbul, ostensibly to meet with Turkish firms, but then we brought in a number of Azeri firms who flew in from Baku, met with these American companies, and then have the negotiations and looking at distributor channels or agency reps and these sorts of things. So long answer to a short question, Bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions from the audience, please? I do have one question for Greg. As the pipelines develop further and more oil and gas come online, how do you see Azerbaijan evolving in the BP portfolio of operations?
Azerbaijan and BP's portfolio.
Yeah.
We have four major countries. Let me back up, explain this in a different way. The company has made big bets on four major markets. And up there among the top four globally is Azerbaijan. So not only, as I mentioned earlier, we made the big bets in the early 1990s, which resulted in the development of the oil and now the gas sector. There's additional oil and there's additional gas coming. And we are in the process of negotiating the next round of production sharing agreements for other fields, in the process of negotiating, extensions of the existing PSAs, all with the intent of investing tens of billions of dollars over the next 20 years in Azerbaijan to bring additional oil and gas to global markets, expand the existing infrastructure, regional infrastructure, all of which creates additional revenue for the country, additional commercial and economic opportunities for the country and for companies. So for us, Azerbaijan represents a big bet, a comfortable bet, a long-term bet for the next 30 to 40 years, central to BP's future revenue growth and also its dividend growth as well.
Thanks. And my last question, I'm hoping to go through, if everybody can give a response, but the Eastern Partnership Summit just finished in Riga. Azerbaijan participated, although it's maybe viewed maybe not as, maybe a little bit more ambivalent in terms of joining the EU, say, versus what Ukraine wanted and sparked the Ukraine conflict. Do you see, is this an impediment, a potential impediment to attracting business if there's any kind of fear of doing something that may bring Russia in back into the region more forcefully, or is there a potential move for Azerbaijan to draw closer to the European Union? I don't know if this is on anybody's radar. It just seems to me that having gone through this last summit in Riga and a lot of discussion about it, I know that we're talking about the U.S., but we're also looking at how it evolves with Europe, which is closer. And anybody would like to jump in? I'm not going to assign anybody to take the first crack at it, but if anybody has any thoughts about Europe in general and the concerns that maybe getting closer to the U.S. or closer to the Europeans, and what impact that may have with how Russia responds, because it is in its back door. Any thoughts?
I think all these projects that have been implemented, especially if you look at the map, if you look at the latitude from the Arctic Ocean to the Persian Gulf, there are 3 countries, and there's Russia, Azerbaijan, and Iran. And
not an easy neighborhood to be in.
Yeah, Azerbaijan has been, since its gained independence, has been very active in building these ties towards Europe. That might be an overall decision of. It's always a commercial-based decision because SOCAR is not the only company who is developing those resources. It's a big consortium, and all the oil and gas companies are interested in developing their fields, and I think the transporting is probably the bigger challenge. And so far, all the pipelines have gone west. And I think, to answer your question, the commercial mentality of the business has been done in Azerbaijan, and the decision that have been made show the practical steps taken towards reaching the European markets, and by reaching Mediterranean Sea or Black Sea, going to the global markets. So BTC was a clear example. Southern Caucasus Pipeline was another gas pipeline, and now Southern Gas Corridor is another example, vivid example, where Azerbaijan is, together with its partners, major oil companies, is determined to transport its oil and gas sources to global markets. So I think, regardless of the decision that have been made from the political aspect, the commercial mentality overlaps over it, and the direction is towards going to European markets.
So the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. The proof is in the pudding, so to speak.
If I could add on to Ruf's comments, from a private sector point of view, and the company that has the most it's commercially, economically at stake in Azerbaijan, we have been impressed by 2, I think, fundamental factors that are useful to address as we partner with SOCAR and partner with the Azeri people. Number 1 is we've been extraordinarily impressed at the way in which the Azeri government has managed its connections and its relationships in arguably one of the most complex and difficult corners of the world. It is not surprising, therefore, and number 2, that the Azeris, as the country grows, as a country develops, as a country matures, it looks for relationships and contacts with all countries around the world. Certainly is the case in our country here. We don't exclude We don't minimize. We open up channels to everybody. And this is reflective of a mature, developing country that's confident in its future, confident in its people, confident in its political systems. And then for a private sector company, this is hugely important in terms of risk mitigation. Energy projects are long wave. They're 20 to 30, 50-year projects. There are inevitable bumps along the way, but the way the Azeri government and people have managed the complex political risk gives comfort to companies and potential investors that the Azeris will continue to get it right in the future.
Daniel, I would just say that, with regard to the Eastern Partnership Council, I mean, this is part of our normal consultative mechanism with our European allies and NATO and others to basically talk about what we see in the region and the opportunities and the challenges in terms of the regional security situation. But, I think when we relate it kind of back again to why we're all here with regard to the business, whether it is energy, whether it is transportation or others, it's kind of, what it's all about at the end of the day is setting a rule of laws or a system of how we do things. And I think that that's kind of the challenge that's presented throughout the region is right now, is that with regard to whether it's deep comprehensive free trade agreements with the Europeans or others, or how our trade is with the United States, this is talking about how we want to run the economies and how I think, and I'm sure Azerbaijan is also in this case, of how we want to join a larger group of successful economies that will not only provide wealth and opportunity within Azerbaijan, but connect Azerbaijan as it already has been connected to foreign markets, because Azerbaijan, as a relatively small country with a small population, obviously is looking at how it can integrate and as part of not only politically but also economically. And we've seen that from the contract of the century under President Geydar Aliyev back 21 years ago, carrying through today. And I think that that's the continuum that we'll continue to see, and I think that's the economic and underpinning message that is coming out of Riga.
Yeah.
Great.
Nicely said.
Just maybe to expand on Michael's point, it's true that closer integration with European and American and Western governments and the adoption of legislation or a framework regime that espouses the types of benefits that this closer integration could provide is very important. But even at the micro level, when you look at maturing Azerbaijani companies, many of which started out in, let's say, a rather chaotic environment, they managed to survive in this very difficult and chaotic environment and build something that was successful and prosperous. As the local companies mature even further, they will inevitably want to go to Western capital markets to raise funds, either through issuance of equity or debt. Many such companies, when they see what's involved in going to Western capital markets, are horrified, but this is a very good thing, that the very process of preparing a company to tap Western capital markets puts so much pressure on the company to increase its corporate governance standards, to ensure the transparency of its financial reporting, to basically shape up in a manner that in the long run will be very, very good for these companies themselves, because they can succeed further and compete better against foreign counterparts, but also in terms of just fostering the development of the types of companies that everyone in the world will want to do business with.
Absolutely.
Dan, can I just make a point? I mean, Jim triggered something with me, which I meant to mention before, is with regard to going back to David Rubenstein's talk this morning, which I personally found fascinating and very interesting. He talked about the mismatch in PE worldwide, which only 17% of the PE is going into populations, 85% of the planet, and how that's going to change over time, and we're going to be seeing more PE needs coming out of going into emerging markets such as Azerbaijan, but also the opportunity for external financing and investment coming out. And I think for those of us who have been involved in this country for many years, to think 20 years ago or even 15 years ago that there would be Azeri firms who are looking to diversify their portfolio and looking in Europe, or for that matter the United States, for logistics or for other investments in their agribusiness, whatever their business might be doing, would have been a little bit far-fetched a few years ago, but it's no longer that case. And indeed, what we do here in the US, we have a program what we call Select USA, where our President Obama just spoke last month or the month before to over 1,000 investors who came in from all over the world, from about 40 different countries, looking at opportunities within the United States to invest their money as part of their diversification. Could be in capital markets, real estate, whatever it might be. And I think that increasingly we're going to be finding Azeri firms who are going to be looking at that as well, who are going to say, well, we want to diversify. We're looking at different holdings. We might see some M&A options in the United States, and that's something that we're interested in doing. So it's the investment not only going into Azerbaijan, but it's also that taking that great capital and deploying it overseas.
So I think from the panelists, you can all agree that we've had a pretty candid discussion here today about great potential for success, pitfalls that people can avoid, but also I think just in general a very positive outlook where there's great potential and great things have already been done, but there's more to come. I think this is a question, is the sentiment that I take away from it, and it's always a nice thing to see after covering emerging markets for over a decade. It's always nice to see the trend is up, not down in this case. So I'd like to thank our panelists very much, Ralph, Greg, Michael, Jim. Thank you very much, and thank you all.
Thank you.
Good job. Michael, nicely done.
Congratulations.
Jim, good job.
Thanks to you as well.
Distinguished guests, we'd now like to invite back to the stage Congressman Bill Delahunt, Chairman of the U.S.-Azerbaijan Chamber of Commerce, to deliver the closing remarks.
Well, these closing remarks will be very brief, but that was a fascinating panel, as all of the panels were this morning, and I think they all deserve a very vigorous round of applause. I know I learned much today about the relationship between Azerbaijan, what is transpiring in Azerbaijan, and also the attitude of American companies and financial institutions about Azerbaijan. As I indicated earlier, my former colleague and friend, Greg Meeks, who is the senior Democrat on several of the subcommittees on the financial services, was scheduled to be the closer, if you will. But I think I know what he would say. And that is that he and many of his colleagues in Congress in both the House and the Senate genuinely value and recognize the significance of the relationship between Azerbaijan and the United States. It's an important relationship to the United States government and to the United States people. As some earlier question was posed, it's a rough neighborhood. Well, we know it's a rough neighborhood, but I think it's improving. And members of Congress who I have discussed Azerbaijan with remind me that the enhancement and improvement of economic and commercial relationships is essential because Congress as a political institution has much at stake. Economics, trade are inextricably linked to a good bilateral relationship. And, you know, many have discussed earlier some of the pitfalls. And yet many of my former colleagues acknowledge that Azerbaijan values the role of women in commerce in their society as a secular Muslim nation. And many of them also remind me that in this particular neighborhood, the pride that Azerbaijan takes in the reality of religious tolerance is important to them. So strides are being made, and I'm confident that they will continue on that trajectory. But I think this was an outstanding first financial forum. And I've been complimenting Susan during the course of the day for putting on, really, she's the one, as Raisa knows, putting on this very informative and interesting symposium, if you will. And I said to her that I was going to not only thank her and those in attendance, but also I was going to say, this has been so good that this is now going to be an annual event. So what I want you to do, she's looking at me, I know, but what I want you to do is put in your schedule for next year a return to the Harvard Club, and let's review, if you will, in the rearview mirror, what has transpired between the United States and Azerbaijan over the course of that particular year. But it was a terrific, in my judgment, a terrific first effort. I'm sure it will improve, and that's the end. Thank you all.
Ladies and gentlemen and honored guests, we have now come to the end of the formal part of the first U.S.-Azerbaijan Banking and Finance Forum. On behalf of the organizers, we'd like to thank everyone who attended this event, and we'd also like to invite all the guests and its participants to the reception that will take place in this room, the Harvard Hall, at 7 p.m. this evening. So thanks again, and have a fabulous afternoon.